español, aunque su presentación la va a hacer en inglés. Alexandre Pólvora, que viene del Laboratorio de Política, de Experimentación Política de la Unión Europea. Lleva allí desde 2016 y quiero agradecerle mucho que finalmente haya podido venir, porque es una época de mucho trabajo por allí. Entonces es una suerte que tenemos. Tuvimos que cambiar la fecha en su momento y bueno, pues para nosotros creo que es una presentación muy especial porque nos sentimos muy identificados con el trabajo que están haciendo allí, pero también con toda la trayectoria de Alexandre, que bueno, hace poco tuve la oportunidad de conocerle en un encuentro y bueno, es alguien que ha estado muy involucrado en proyectos de cultura libre, de cultura maker. Si tenéis tiempo y tenéis la oportunidad, os recomiendo que miréis su página web, que es alexandrepolvora.net, y ahí encontraréis un montón de textos relacionados con tecnología, ciencia y sociedad, y que es un poco su campo, con lo cual bueno, pues hay bastantes paralelismos con muchas de las cosas que se han ido haciendo aquí en los últimos años. Entonces, esta es la última sesión que tenemos de este ciclo del Grupo de Trabajo de Madrid Escucha, para ir pensando cómo podría ser un laboratorio de experimentación pública aquí en Madrid, y creo que Alexandre nos va a dar buenas ideas. Así que muchas gracias, Alexandre. Esta sesión durará 1 hora y luego ya pasaremos a la parte del taller. Bueno, gracias.
Gracias, Marco. Gracias, Cecilia. If you don't mind, I'm going to switch to English because I'm too ashamed of my Spanish to do this in Spanish. But let's try. Let's try the English part. So, as Marco said, I'm Alexandre Pólvora, but you can call me Alex. It's easier for everyone. And I'm a project lead / researcher / policy analyst / whatever you need me to be at the EU Policy Lab of the European Commission's Joint Research Center, which you see there. And maybe just a bit of context for those who don't know how the European Commission works, and I'm guessing a lot of you, because I most of the time don't know how the European Commission works. So this is a huge problem for my own work. The Commission is sort of divided in sorts like the national government. So we have like ministries of health, of consumer protection, of industry, but in the case of the Commission, we are called Directorates General. So what you see here, the Joint Research Center, it's a Directorate General. But the main thing about the Joint Research Center that you should, in fact, have in mind is that instead of us having what it's called like a sectorial policy mandate, so we don't work in finance policy, or we don't work in farming policy or environmental policy, we are fully dedicated to supporting the whole policy of the European Commission with evidence. And as you can see, we are quite big, the whole Joint Research Center, and we are divided in 6 different countries, well, 6 different sites, 5 different countries. And most important, and this is one of the main characteristics that allows the EU Policy Lab that I'm going to talk about to be so special, is that we have no policy agenda of our own, so we have no stake in the game. For example, if a policy directorate from the Commission wants to discuss finance with another policy directorate, they can come to us, we can mediate. So we are not neutral, obviously there's no neutrality in everything, you know, we don't claim any neutrality whatsoever, but we don't have a stake in the policy game. And in fact, I think we are the only organization in the whole entire world, in the public sector, fully dedicated to producing knowledge for policy. So that's our only mission. Again, the EU Policy Lab is a little bit different, but we are fully part of the Joint Research Center. You know, this is the mission of the Joint Research Center, and the mission of searching for evidence for policy still stands strong. And it's still what we do, and you know, we 3,000 people, we work from nuclear research to health standards, to genomics, to biotechnologies, to whatever you can think about. Normally the GRC has someone working on it, and if you Google us, you'll find it. And in fact, I learned this the other day. 95%, this is quite a weird, geeky trivia, 95% of all the nuclear isotopes used for cancer treatment in Europe is produced by the GRC, which is something that I don't know what I'm mentioning. You know, we are still fully committed to providing evidence for policy, but the times have changed, and this is true. We all know, like, evidence is not what it used to be. Evidence is not the good currency that it used to be. And I like to quote this guy, Jerry Ravetz. I don't know if anyone has heard about him, but he used to be a big scholar in Oxford, like in the 70s, and he coined this term post-normal times, which I think is way more actual, in fact, right now than it used to be, where facts are uncertain, values are in dispute, stakes are high, and decisions are urgent. And so I think that the policy lab inside the Joint Research Center was created, in fact, 5 years ago to address this kind of post-normal times, to address this uncertainty, to address this not a world of certainty, linearity, causality. And, some say that the usual ways don't work anymore. And in fact, we agree. We are the EU Policy Lab of the Joint Research Center. And we kind of like to say that the Policy Lab is both the physical and the conceptual space. So we have a lab, but we also have a way of thinking, a way of working. And we like to say that it's a conceptual space for, and now I'm going to use a lot of buzzwords, for innovative, for collaborative, for experimental policy making. And you'll see what I mean about this. And, I don't know how much you here know about what policy labs are, but I normally like to say that policy labs come in, like, there's a spectrum. And policy labs are normally positioned in this spectrum, where in one side, you have those that are more grounded to the citizens and more close to real implementation on the ground, real, neighborhood level, city level, really working in. You can see the changes of what the policy lab does in the daily lives of citizens. And on the other side of the spectrum, it's like those who are inside these big bureaucratic machines that mainly support other parts of the machine, that mainly support other parts of the machine. And as the policy lab of the European Commission, we are way closer to this more big machine side of the spectrum, where we don't really work a lot with those on the ground, but we work with those who work with those on the ground, if you get what I'm saying. We are in a real weird space because we are inside the GRC, which is dedicated to knowledge production and also knowledge management, because we also get sources of knowledge from other places, academia, NGOs, industry, businesses, and we also try to manage those sources and bring it back to policy. But we also do experimentation and anticipation. And this is a weird space for us. This is not always an easy way to make it work, and there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of tension. A lot of policy labs don't have this. They just work on experimentation. They just work on the ground. But we are part of a different machine, and we don't want to forget about this, because we internalize these evidence-based approaches. We don't like to work without thinking that we are producing evidence for others, and we don't like to work without being based on evidence produced by others in our own institution or others outside our own space. And maybe here, this is one of the main, when I'm presenting the policy lab, this is one of the main points I like to discuss, and we can then go into the discussion in the workshop or in the Q&A. Even when not required, experimentation in policy should always be based in evidence. And I'm quite aware of what I'm saying is not fully shared by those who work in policy experimentation or policy innovation. Because at the end of the day, experimentation should always drink from evidence too. So it's a marriage, it's a dance. I don't like to use this kind of metaphors, but it's true, You play with it, you do experimentation, you do evidence, you combine it, and you have to find an equilibrium between both, and at least we do. And one other thing that I normally like to stress, because these policy labs, I don't know how much you know again about the story, but they've been around for like 10, 15 years. Ken Island in the Netherlands, then Mind Lab in Denmark, then a lot of all those, Nesta, GovLab, a lot of them around. But this is also not quite consensual in the policy lab world, but for us, and especially for me, this is quite crucial. Opting for intuition or creativity only based approaches, I don't think it works for policy innovation. It's true that they're flashy, it's true that you can sell it, and it's true that everyone likes to hear the latest buzz, the latest system, design, thinking, whatever framework. But at the end of the day, we need to be, this is public money, and this is, in the case of European Commission, this is millions and millions of people who are affected by, if we experiment in the wrong way, if the policymakers get results from us that are not tested, that are not robust, if they go into the ground and they deploy this, this can go wrong in multiple ways. This can go wrong because it was a wasted opportunity. This can go wrong because we wasted money. This can go wrong because, in fact, the results were not what we were expecting. So for me, it's quite crucial to really make this point that intuition and creativity go a long way, but without evidence, and we were discussing this a little while ago, without patterns, without triangulation, I don't think we should be speaking about public policy innovation or public policy experimentation. And I'm more than happy to discuss this all later. This, what you see here, is what I can call our ecosystem of collaborations, of partners. And as a rule, and all rules are meant to be broken, but as a rule, our main entry points, our main partners are in fact those in the top. So normally we work with the rest of the European Commission, or the Commissioners' cabinets, or Director General's agency services. No, I won't go into that. And this is more or less the institutional order that we follow. But that doesn't really mean much sometimes, because, again, all rules are meant to be broken, and depending on whatever project we have in our hands, we can mix and match these partners, and we can even start just working with NGOs on the ground and then feed it to the top level policy, or feed it to the middle, or work with the World Bank and then feed it, It's, in theoretical level, this is like that. In practical level, this is a huge mess, just to let you know. And this really depends on which project we are talking about. And maybe just one other thing. How do we work in this, again, answering a question that Cecilia had before, how do we work with these partners here? So mainly we have two ways of working. They can come to us, any of these partners, I would say 80%, the two at the top first two lines, 80% they come to us and they say, well, we want to explore this. We want a future approach, we want a behavioral insights approach, we want a design approach. We want to know more about this topic. We heard about this, we don't know what's happening, or we want an intervention, we have a problem, we have a service that it's not working, we have a funding mechanism that it's not really targeting who is supposed to target, so they can come to us. Or, and this also happens a lot, right now it's happening way more than it used to, we can go to them and tell them, have you heard about this topic? We think this might be really good for you. Imagine, Director General for Agriculture. Right now we have a project, I'm not going to talk about this project, but we have a project on the future of the farmer. What will be the farmer of the future? This was not on their radar. And a couple of colleagues of mine, they went there and said, we've been looking into this, we've been reading about this. Have you thought about exploring this, what will be the farmer of the future? And said, okay, let's do it. So now we have a one-year project with the Director General of Agriculture on this. As you saw before, the Policy Lab, in fact, aggregates several fields and disciplines, the Policy Lab. But our strongest point is, in fact, foresight, future-oriented approaches. There's a lot of historical reasons for this. It was already present inside the Commission. The original team that founded the Policy Lab was, in fact, a big part of the foresight team of the Commission. But there's also a practical reason for this. Most of what the Commission wants to do in terms of experimentation is quite well future-oriented most of the time. And in fact, last year as a Policy Lab, and this is a trend that is happening in a lot of other policy labs, we are transforming into other types of units. For example, Mind Lab, I don't know if you heard this, but Mind Lab was the then Danish Policy Lab, and basically they got disbanded, and now there's the Digital Disruption Task Force. So we are trying to figure, again, we do foresight on our own, so we are trying to figure out what will come next. So we started these competence centers, and so the first one that we started was a competence center on foresight. And what is a competence center, you might ask? Well, a competence center is basically, let's say, a dedicated service with kind of off-the-shelf tools or off-the-shelf solutions that other parts of the Commission can come to us and we don't need to explain a lot. They can just, we have this and we can use it right off the bat. So this is, I'm really summarizing what the competence center is, but that's mainly it. And in fact, we now absorb the team on modeling. We are now starting a competence center on modeling too. And after the summer, we'll have a competence center on behavioral insights. So we'll have 3 competence centers. And this, for example, is one of the things it's one of the tools or one of the approaches that we have in the competence center in Foresight. And you might ask what horizon scanning is for those who don't work in Foresight. And in fact, I like the expression horizon scanning because it's exactly what it says it is. It's basically scanning the horizon and looking for what's coming next. And there's a whole lot of theoretical approaches to this, and you look for weak signals, strong signals, you categorize them, you cluster them, you do prioritization, there's a whole thing that goes into this. But the most interesting part of this is that we engage policymakers, we engage experts, and we engage other colleagues from the GRC working in other scientific disciplines. So we amass this huge network of, I'm going to use a term nowadays quite well, collective intelligence. So we work with the collective intelligence of the future, let's say that. And so horizon scanning is one thing that we have now ongoing. We do it face-to-face, we do it online, we run several workshops, and depending on the topic, it may be climate change, so we go into climate change. People send us stuff. We have our own colleague dedicated to aggregate what we call signals. Then he collects a lot of stuff, so every week we are doing sorting out sessions of what's there. It's quite complex, but it's quite interesting if you want to dive into it, and you can find a lot of stuff online. The Megatrends Hub, also one of the tools that the Foresight Competence Center is providing now. I'm just discussing the Foresight Competence Center now because in fact it's the only one in place. But I can then tell you what the others could be next. So this Megatrends Hub, it's maybe a step above the horizon scanning. It's something a little bit more institutionalized. So it's not only like what's fluid out there, but it's what we define through research, and a lot of research. It took us 3 years to get here. 14 megatrends that we think will impact policy, EU and beyond, local level, national level, outside the EU. And it's quite interesting because this hub is being fed continuously, so it's dynamic. Right now it's kind of stuck because internal problems, but it will be going dynamic again in September. It's being fed by qualitative data, by scientists and experts from all around the world that we crunch ourselves in the Competence Center, but also by quantitative data that comes from sources such as Eurostat, European Media Monitor. We have our own tool, which is a Trends Innovator Monitor. So we combine qualitative and quantitative in these megatrends. And what's most interesting for us is that we're also developing, and we are now piloting, this is beta stage now, an engagement tool. So we have sort of a game with cards that with each megatrend, and we do some sort of like 2-hour sessions with policymakers, and they can more or less play, with which megatrend is most crucial for them, which one they don't see it right now but might affect them in the future, which is totally out of their radar, and we normally do this prioritization. This is quite a good way of making them think about futures. We call this future-proofing. And if you Google future-proofing, you see this, there's a lot of stuff about this. So another thing that we also have available in the Competence Center, it's the SES, Serious Exploration Game, and we are quite proud of this one. It won an award 2 years ago of one of the best serious games in the world. From the Association of Professional Futurists, that's it. And this is basically a role-playing game. It's a board game, it's a role-playing game. And this one that you're seeing here is the original one. There's a report there, 2035, Paths Towards Sustainability EU Economy. So this was developed for this project that was done. It was one of the first projects that we did in the EU Policy Lab. And this is sort of, it enables participants to simulate paths toward the future. So it normally has four participants, and this can be individuals or collectives. You know, you can play like with 16 people at the table, more or less. It's a lot, but 16 still works with 4 teams. And there's always a game master that normally acts as the public, and it normally has 2 rounds. So you get to experiment 2 roles, and the roles get defined and the issues get defined depending on the topic. So, you know, again, this is fully open source. We have more than 20 versions developed. So we developed versions for migration, for environment, sustainability, and others. And we have external partners that have been developing this. And even the big Belgian supermarket chain developed the game based on our own game, which is kind of funny. And again, this is all open source, so you can reach out to us, and the files are all open. We have instructions to play with this. So this is quite cool. I really like this one. So now I'm going to present a little bit about some of the projects that we have ongoing. And just for you to say that I don't speak about anything but the future, this is a behavioral insight project. It's a social biking challenge. It's quite cool. And it's basically, so just a little bit. As I mentioned, we also have a behavioral insights team. So the Foresight team, we are around 15 people. And in fact, I'm one of the few that works in between 2 teams. So I work with the Foresight team and the design team. And then we also have a behavioral team and a modeling team that we just absorbed, but they're not fully integrated yet in the lab. And this project is from our behavioral insight team, and it's a quite cool project. It's basically an intervention, a behavioral intervention, to encourage cycling as a collective social habit. And it's based on the notion that doing stuff in a collective way, that I was discussing with Marcos in a different topic, sometimes has better outputs than doing stuff individually. So basically, my colleagues from the behavioral team, they designed this research experiment, and to measure behavioral changes achieved with different incentives. So we are testing this. So already, if I'm not mistaken, 24 different European cities have already piloted this just last year. And we are testing different incentives models to see which one gets people to cycle more. And then, you know, you have the whole policy thing about sustainability, healthy lifestyles, but at the end of the day, this is a research project to figure out incentive mechanisms to create collective action towards a certain behavioral change. So again, we are the Joint Research Center, we do research. It's true that we do experimentation, we work a lot with, you know, trying to change habits, but it's research. And in fact, you can download the app. It's available for Android and iPhone. It's called Bike Print. And it allows users to combine. It has a credit system, and you can play with your own friends, and you can kind of compete with them in terms of who amasses more points. So it's quite a cool project. Another project. This one is in fact on the other side. It's almost a purely design project, and it's quite precious. In fact, this is not fully public, so I'm showing you this, and I'm going to tell you as much as I can. This is quite precious because this comes from a direct request from SecGen, which I had no clue what it was till a few years ago. SecGen is basically the Director General inside the European Commission that runs the whole show. It's a Secretariat General. Basically, they sit at the top of the whole Commission, and they basically, all the Commission obeys to whatever the SecGen wants. And when the SecGen asks something, we all go there. That's basically how it happens. So this came because there's this, I'm going to try to make this fast, but this better regulation package was something, it's kind of trying to modernize the Commission. It was by the Science Commission by Juncker. It's a huge document. I think it's this big when it's printed out. And the stakeholder consultation, it's the chapter 50. It's basically a lot of projects that go public inside the Commission, they need to do stakeholder consultation. So they need to open surveys or do other types of stakeholder consultation, interviews, And this process was quite old until here. So SecGen came to us and said, let's rewrite this, let's rework this. And we said, okay, because again, you don't say no to SecGen. And so this is part of the way that we redesigned this with them, and this is still ongoing. This is done by my colleagues in the design team, and this is a mix between service design and the systems approach. And basically this is picking up what they had before, mapping the whole system and trying to see where it can be improved, where you can replace some tools by others. So again, this is quite an interesting, it's a pity that I cannot really go into a lot of stuff here. This is another project, and I'm showing you this because this is a special project, because this is something that we don't have a lot. This is totally an external project. It was done fully with external partners, not inside the European Commission. It's funded by European money, and I'm quite proud of this one, because in fact I was one of the coordinators of this one. And we won an Ars Electronica honorary mention last year, which I'm also quite proud. Maybe some of you know it already, because maybe Cesar knows it, because this was one of the partners was Fab Lab Barcelona. And this was basically run on top of what Fab Lab Barcelona had, the Smart Citizen Kit, which is a low-cost environmental monitoring tool, open source. And basically the idea was that people were playing with these low-cost sensors, but there was not much happening. Not a lot of social change was happening because you could measure environmental data. So we all decided this was done with FAR Society, Fab Lab Barcelona, then the university, us, the Policy Lab, and the Peer Educators Network in Kosovo. And we did 9 pilots in 3 different cities, and we basically work on top of the technology to build communities. And this was quite cool. You know, we developed the whole framework. There's this toolkit. You can download the toolkit. It has a lot of tools, a lot of strategies that you can build your own communities with open source technologies. This, you know, again, coming from, as Marco said, this was my previous background, the maker world, the open source world. This, for me, is one of my favorite projects. So, now moving slowly again back into future. This is also one of all of my favorite projects, like having kids. This project is quite special. Because as you know, migration is a quite sensitive issue right now. And it's also a quite sensitive issue for us, because when you start doing experimentation with migration, you start finding a lot of roadblocks, and you start finding a lot of, you know, people that want to, and this is for good and bad, you know. I'm not saying that these roadblocks are good or bad, just that there's a lot of interesting systems in place, and when you start doing public policy innovation or experimentation, this is one of the most sensitive topics. And this project basically, it has several goals. And first, it aims to improve the EU knowledge about what drives migration in the countries of origin, which, as you know, it's one of the most pressing issues for figuring out what to do with migration right now. Then, based on this, it's meant to challenge common assumptions in the common discourse about migration that it's now ongoing. Then, and this is the future part, it's meant to identify possible future implications of the policy decisions made today. So we are in fact analyzing what's being regulated, what's being put on the ground, and figuring it out how this will play in the future. And again, foresight is not forecasting, we are not predicting anything, we are just trying to open up horizons and trying to figure out as best as we can what will be there in the future. And then suggest areas for possible policy interventions. And this is what you see here, so based on a lot of stakeholder engagement on the ground, you know, with member states, with national governments, also in the Brussels bubble, we develop 4 scenarios of migration. And we are now in the second stage, we are now developing tools such as, imagine, for example, a migrant journey, which you see there in the middle. So for policymakers to figure out what a migrant goes through, and it's impossible to say what a migrant goes through a piece of paper, but still, it's quite powerful when you're speaking with policymakers. You know, with the moment they leave their own country of origin till the moment they reach an European country, how is that journey made? What's the kind of obstacles, what's the kind of processes that they go through? And this really opens up, it seems that it's not a lot, and we're all afraid that this would not be enough, but still, for policymakers, this opens a lot of eyes. And again, we work a lot with personas, we work a lot with design models here. And what's important here, what's interesting here is that in the third stage, we are developing a game with EU educational authorities targeted at school children. So this will go from playing with policymakers to playing with kids, which sometimes, let's say that. So another project mixing foresight and design. Future of Government 2030. And this might be hotter for some of you here because you work in government. The goal of this project is basically to establish dialogues. This is more an open-ended project, what we call more an exploratory scoping project on the preparedness of governments for the upcoming democratic transformations. So, to do this, the project looked into what we call future governance models or future roles of governance, let's say around 2030 and after 2030. And the core activities of this project involve already 6 large citizen dialogues in Austria, Poland, Malta, Sweden, Spain, which I don't know where it was. I think it was here in Madrid, and Ireland, and also multiple exchanges and stakeholder consultation with NGOs, with national governments, local governments, regional governments, citizens, which we really managed to engage citizens. And what you see here, this is the result of the bottom-up development. This was really bottom-up by those stakeholders on the ground. We developed 4 scenarios of possible governance futures for 2030. And this first helps us discuss governance with policymakers. And then we invited 6 design schools from all over Europe to create new ideas and prototype services that would exist in these 4 scenarios. So public services, basically. And more than 100 students submitted their designs, and we managed to produce 40 concepts and prototypes. This is all online. Basically what I'm showing here, if you go to the Policy Lab website, most of it you can find online. And these prototypes are now being used in exhibition modes with policymakers, with stakeholders on the ground. And it's interesting how it triggers new ideas, because it's true that we all think about scenarios, it's really meta level. But when you think about a service that would be used in DIY democracy, this makes minds go round in a different way. So now I want to go a little bit, I want to do a zoom in one project, specific project. First, because I know it quite well, because I led this project, but because I'm saying this not because I led this project, because it was one of our most successful projects so far in the EU Policy Lab. And I'm going to try to tell you as much as I can condense a story about this project. This project is called Blockchain for You. And I won't go into this, but the 3 things that you see in the bottom were the main goals of the project. And what we were trying to do was push the frontiers of what's common practice in policy when looking into emerging technologies, in this case, blockchain. And in this project, we in fact combine STS, Science Technology Studies, foresight, behavioral insights, and design. So we were able to combine the whole Policy Lab team working on this. And this allowed us to go into uncertainty, complexity, incentives, trust, a lot of topics that normally we don't have time to go when we're doing experimentation at the policy level. And for you just to get also an idea how a project like blockchain came to be, this in fact emerged from another project. So this happens a lot. We have other projects, and then they have spin-offs, and then they have spin-offs, and then this creates a huge tree of projects that sometimes becomes too unmanageable. And this project was the first project that the Policy Lab did in 2013. It was done on request of the Vice President Katainen of the Commission. Also, when a Vice President asks you to do something, you also don't refuse, because it's quite high level. Visibility in the project was quite good. And, European collaborative economy, platform economy, sharing economy, gig economy, and it was a 2-year project. And in fact, one of the signals that showed up here was blockchain at the time in 2013. It was only crypto and some Bitcoin, but there was already something there. So The way that we did this, we saw a signal in another project. We knocked on a lot of doors inside the Commission, and we managed to open the door of DG Grow, which is the Director General responsible for industry, SMEs, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And they said, well, blockchain, yeah, we heard about this. So let's, tell us when to do a project, let's do a project together. So this is what we did. We basically did a really complex project based on qualitative research, interviews, surveys, ethnography, literature reviews, data analysis, and so on. But as we are policy lab, and this time around we really wanted to push it, and we did push it, we wanted to really work a lot on co-creation and vision building. And we wanted to work on something else that I'll show you after. And here you have, we engaged for this project more than 250 stakeholders. From industry to regulation, we had players such as Endesa, IBM, all the big blockchain platforms. So we managed to have everyone, European Parliament, World Economic Forum, World Bank. We were not expecting to be so big in this project, but we kept inviting people and they kept accepting. And this was quite cool for us, in fact. And through this work, the workshop A was basically collective visioning on scenarios of blockchain. Workshop B was basically prototyping. So in the workshop A, then we ended up with 9 sectors that blockchain, this is blockchain for non-financial applications, just for industry. And we ended up with 9 sectors. Then we zoomed in into 5 sectors in the second workshop, and we developed prototypes, and I'm going to present you the prototypes after. In the workshop C, we invited those who were not part of the blockchain world, but what we identified as being like the first responders. So SME associations, industry associations, those who are not working, but if and when blockchain hits the ground, those will be the first ones to feel it, either because their associates will come to them and say, why haven't you told us about blockchain? Either because they will be starting investing in blockchain. So we really try to get as many different views here as possible. Just want to show you something. So this is one of our prototypes that we did.
What if everyone could access all information they need in a decentralized way before repairing something like a second-hand scooter? Meet Vantage Point, a speculative blockchain prototype in the advanced manufacturing sector. Vantage Point was co-created for the Blockchain for EU research project. To learn more, visit the blog of the Joint Research Center EU Policy Lab. What if everyone could access all information they need?
So we did, in fact, 5 different speculative blockchain prototypes, and you can find this all online. This one that you saw was on advanced manufacturing. The first one was on energy, the second one on supply chains. What you saw is in the middle. Then the other one on creative industries, and the other one on health industries. And we invited speculative designers to work with us. We invited industry stakeholders to work with us. So these prototypes were fully co-created with stakeholders, and obviously we had some input. But this is basically their own work, and they're all co-authors on this, and they're fully open source. You can download the code. Some are based on, some are fully functional with blockchain platforms. Some are based on, non-functional Raspberry Pi platforms. We simulate stuff, but they're quite cool. You can see them. Okay, this went a little bit out. So one of the things that, in fact, I wanted to tell you about is that this project was quite a success story for the EU Policy Lab because, and this is also a discussion that I was having with Cecilia before, when doing policy experimentation, I don't know how many of you work on this fully, but it's not always easy to evaluate or to say this really played a big role on the ground or on the policy. And a way that the policy lab, and in fact the whole Joint Research Center, does this kind of evaluation is that we see how much of our work got translated into real policy. And what you're seeing here is basically a lot for an experimentation project. Because we had more impact than this, but this is quite high level. So we managed to, the call that you see there is 3 million call for SMEs. The other one is communication from the Commission, which is quite crucial also. And the one in the bottom is communication from the European Parliament, a resolution. So this is one of the ways that we kind of measure our impact on the ground. And this for us, there's a whole system based on criteria, and I can go into that if you want. But again, it's not easy to measure impact of experimentation, and this is how we do it sometimes. You can find, we published a report, and we have a lot of materials available on our blog, and it's fully interactive, more or less. So you can find all this, and again, all the projects, you can go to the blog. It's blogs.ec.europa.eu, policy lab, and then depending on the project, it's the slug there. And now to finalize, I just wanted to tell you, because I told you how this project came to be, and I wanted to tell you where projects go when they end, how this follows up. And in fact, we were so successful with this project that we had a new policy request. And this policy request, in fact, came from the European Parliament directly, which is not normal. The European Parliament asks something to the Commission. The Commission has hundreds of projects every year ongoing. And the Parliament normally asks like around 30 projects to the Commission every year. This is one of them it was asked last year, it starts this year. And it's called the pilot project. And it's basically an opportunity for us to play a little bit more with blockchain and emerging tech, but take experimentation a little bit beyond research. And this is new for us. This is us moving into implementation. That's something that we don't do normally. And we are working here, so I forgot to tell you, but each of the projects I presented, they normally have a client, an internal client. So for example, the future of migration, it's DG Home. The social biking, DG Move. The one from blockchain, the first one, DG Grow. This one, DG Connect. So we don't do projects, we try not to do projects on our own, because we need to deliver something to the policy cycle. And the policy cycle is being run by the other parts of the Commission. So this one was a request by the European Parliament. They came to us. We went to DG Connect, which is the Director General for Communication, Networks, Technologies, Content, and something else. And basically, they are partnering up with us on this. And this is basically us. We will do these 4 things that you see here. We'll do research, map an ecosystem. We'll do an exchange of best practices with similar projects. But most importantly, we will co-design and launch an accelerator. And I know that accelerators are now the hot thing around, everyone has an hackathon and a boot camp and accelerator. But this one will be a little bit different because we opened a call recently. Well, in fact, the call is ending now May 28th for a consortium, for a sort of an H2020 project to work with us because we didn't want to do this alone. We wanted to work with stakeholders on the ground. We could do it on our own. We could develop it. We have resources to do it. And in fact, we are going to give, this call is 700K to the third-party consortium. They need them to give back to some projects on the ground, so they don't get to keep all the money. But this, we really like this project because it will allow us to put our mouth exactly where we normally like. We normally say, oh, we want the policy DGs to do something, and then they just take our experimentation, they don't really take it that far. This time around, we are in control of part of the implementation. And this is quite cool. And again, and also based on this, we are creating a huge group of similar organizations. So we are now talking with the OECD. Well, we already talked with the OECD, the World Bank, the IMF, several UN agencies, and I'm missing someone here, the World Economic Forum. And we will gather them all after the summer in Brussels to start co-creating frameworks, common frameworks for supporting emerging tech on the ground. So this is something new because we found out that a lot of these organizations were looking into the same thing. We are kind of all in the same moment where we've been doing experimentation, we've been working on policy innovation, but we feel that we want more. So all these teams were kind of more or less all in the similar space, and this is quite cool. In fact, this last one, and I was supposed to have a colleague here today with me, Angela Hansen from OECD, and this project is from them originally. What you see here is from the Observatory for Public Sector Innovation from OECD, and they've been working on these 4 facets of public innovation. And we will start next week working with them, with the Institute for the Future based in Palo Alto, and with other partners that will be announced next month that I cannot disclose now, on this, the anticipatory innovation, the one there on uncertainty and exploring radical. And this is also a spin-off from the blockchain project because we started engaging with OECD there and with this topic there, and we also wanted to move a little bit closer to implementation. But in this case, we'll be on a more meta level. And what anticipatory innovation means, and again, please visit the OECD, the OPSI website. This is a wonderful project. They have all this explained there. And our goal is kind of to co-create practical frameworks for national and local and regional governments to be better prepared for the future and not just react to it when it comes. So it's kind of putting in places, we don't exactly know how this will look like, but let's say create public structures that really think about dedicated fully to the future, or create mechanisms of horizon scanning or of foresight techniques that will empower national governments to not always be, chasing after what's happening, such as, sharing economy, no one saw it coming, or at least national governments say they were not prepared for it, they didn't saw Uber coming, so this is a way that we also want to work in emerging tech with a more foresight framework, but also on a practical level. So again, I'm really sorry that Angela couldn't be here today. She's also quite sorry because we've been on the phone last Friday on this. And this is one of the projects that we're also going to take forward with them. And I think Angela will show up maybe next year here. And this is my last one. Thank you. That's it. And now questions.
Thank you, Alexandra, for your beautiful presentation. I have a question regarding the main challenges that you are facing in terms of implementing innovation in public administration. In your experience, what are the main challenges and problems that when you try to implement something in a specific context you are facing at this moment? So if you can tell us something about this.
So as I said in the beginning, we are quite a special policy lab, or we're quite a special innovation unit because at the end of the day we are research. So we don't face normally the same problems that a traditional innovation unit inside the government faces, which is the implementation part. We do more the technical support, scientific support, the research support, and then we pass it on. Having said this, there's still a lot of problems that we face every day. Well, first, there's a lot of resistance to change, as we all know. Things work in a certain way, and if you try to change the way of the things, people have to work a little bit more, or people have to take what has been working for 5 or 10 years and making it to something different. And this takes me to one thing that I learned the hard and the good way for the past 4 years, which is this depends a lot on humans. So the main challenges that we face, in fact, we all say it's bureaucracy, it's a system. It's not, most of the time. It's true that there's a lot of rules in place, procurement, a lot of funding rules, but it's normally the humans that you speak with, and I'm going to give you examples. Sometimes we have a really good project, and everyone bought it in the policy, people that were, and then the director changes, and then the new guy that goes into it doesn't want it. And then the people below him will say, no, but this is amazing, Yeah, but this is not mine. I have this new idea. In fact, I was working with PwC or with McKinsey in my previous job, and now I'm bringing them in. So another challenge is competition. And, I'm sure, a lot of policy innovation units around the world face this. They're inside government, but then there are a lot of, I'm not going to use the word sexier because it's not good, but there's a lot of more fancier and flashier stuff outside. They can sell it quite well, they can package quite well. And internal units, they know already a lot of problems, and they are going to tell you those problems or tell the policymakers. Well, the external companies, they won't. So another problem is that we tend not to lie. So, because, we are inside the same administration, so we want to see it happen in a good way. So again, we are quite shielded because we are research, but when we move into implementation, we have problems. A lot of problems come from procedures, the machine already in place, but a lot of them come from humans, resisting change or ownership. We figured out this the hard way after a couple of months, maybe 1.5 years. Co-ownership of projects, it's quite crucial for this. So not design the project and then go there and sell them the project. From the beginning, what you want, what's your problem, how can we help you? Even if this might happen a lot, even if we don't see the problem the same way, it's their problem. And we are a service, we are a dedicated service, so we will do our best to frame it in a better way, but it's still their problem. And again, try to keep the good humans in place, because when they change, there's nothing you can do. Yeah.
So thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. So to follow up on the previous question, I was wondering about evidence. So you mentioned that you are doing policy-based, evidence, policy making based on evidence. And I was wondering whether you have any issues in arguing what it constitutes and what it does not constitute evidence.
That's in fact one of our main internal discussions. And there's a lot of answers for that. In my view, and the view of a lot of us, evidence, well, again, we do a lot of qualitative work, so evidence is not numbers, it is not normal statistics. In our view, evidence is something that other people can look at it and see how it was built, can open it and see which problems were there, and can build upon it. Then what this kind of evidence can be depends on the projects. For example, in the blockchain project, from the beginning we did a lot of literature review. We tried to get as many reliable, robust scientific sources as possible from the beginning, even before we started doing experimentation. Then we went into interview mode, we went into ethnography mode, we amassed as much as we can. We tried to look for patterns, we tried to triangulate evidence from a lot of sources, projects similar to ours. We tried to see what was repeated, we tried to see what was best practice, we tried to see what could be replicated. And only then, when we were sure that what we were saying was not well, it's always subjective, but it was not fully subjective, could be seen by other people and understood by other people who are not part of our own project, we said this can be evidence for others. So for us, it's if others can understand the process, and we try to detail methodologically as much as possible. I even try to say the number of scissors we use for a workshop, because this for me constitutes evidence at the end of the day. Because if other people want to create a similar workshop, they can build upon the evidence of what worked in our workshop. It's impossible to say that our workshop was better or worse than the other one, and it's impossible to say that this constitutes evidence. But we start creating patterns. And in the next project, we do another workshop based on our own. And we have people building workshops on top of our own methods. So again, it's quite difficult to say in experimentation what creates evidence, but for us it's repetition, replicability, and openness. I think that's it. And again, it's quite contextual and depends on each project.
Yes, because I'm not sure I understood what is your influence in the policy-making cycle. I understand that sometimes a directorate of employment, DG, ask you for a foresight or for experimentation or for evidence, and at the end of your work is to give them papers or to work with them for a while. What is exactly the way you enter in this cycle of policy?
No, it's an amazing question, in fact. It's exactly everything that you said. Sometimes we provide, sometimes the only thing they want is a report, and that's it, that's what they want. Sometimes we help the policymakers to design regulation or funding mechanisms. Sometimes we help them even go a step further, which is design a whole mechanism, a whole policy mechanism framework for 4 years. Sometimes we help them discover new topics that they were not considering, so that we influence a lot on the policy cycle. Sometimes we bring new players into the game, and this also changes a lot the policy cycle, because the normal ways of the Commission and normal governments working is they have 1 or 2 experts. When they do that, and they design their own mechanism, funding, regulation, law, on a piece of paper, and that's it. The way that we do, the first thing that we always try to do is open it up. Bring as many people as possible into the process. Then help them see stuff in a different way, that it's not only a technological or technical way. And then depending on the project, may it be agriculture or farming, or we can go a step further. So for example, in this last project, the accelerator, we will really support on-the-ground projects that will be conducting new solutions for public and social sectors. So in that way, we are fully influencing how the policy is being played. But it really depends. But yes, it can go from report to full implementation.
So my question is a little bit related to that one, which is about the impact. Because I am thinking about the migration project, for instance.
Yeah.
I'm imagining who is using those personas and those journeys that you created, if you know how those things are being used, how do they link with projects that are already being done, like the Migri project in Finland, for instance. Is there any relationship, or is it too far away from that ground level?
Yeah, in this case, so first we started doing more like fundamental research, like basic research on migration. And then in this project, in fact, came from, we're not passing through with the basic research, just a report. So we had to start developing new tools for the policymakers that were reading the report, but were not really acting upon it. And so who is using these tools, in fact, are the EU policymakers responsible for defining migration policies. Exactly those who have a stake in defining migration policies. Yeah.
But not those working in the service policy.
Also, so first we developed this for the EU policy, and then we passed it on to national governments, and then we passed it on to NGOs and CSOs on the ground. So we are going from top level in Brussels to Lesbos in Athens, in Greece. So again, we know how it is being used in Brussels in national governments. We know it's being used on the ground level, but we don't have much control on it. And this is why my colleagues from this project then went into the third stage to start designing the game more educational, because they felt that, you can only control it to a certain point, how this is going to play out into the ground, but you can use all this and start doing a third stream, which is education with school children, and maybe now they're using a lot of people from behavioral insights, maybe try to start changing, attitudes and behaviors at the school kids level. But yeah, this one is not an easy project to figure out because it's quite a sensitive topic, so there's not a lot of information being disclosed. We know, because we run our own workshops, how it's being used. We know how it's being resisted or not resisted, but it's not one of those that it's an easy one. It's not at all.
Okay, I have one. There is some goal in the air. It's about rebuilding trust in public institutions. No? But when I saw a blockchain initiative, I think in Rachel Bosman,
Yeah.
and you are trying to change the base of the trust or not, because she talked about distributes trust and not institutional trust, and she said there is another phase in this. What do you think about that? Some project try to reveal or not trust, or is not a goal?
So the first thing that I would say is that I'm blockchain cautious. So I don't really believe in the blockchain hype, even if I've been working on it for 4 years now. When people say that blockchain plays with trust, it's true on a certain level. It can basically decentralize some trust mechanisms. But I don't believe a technology such as blockchain will bring the changes that Rachel talks about. In our case, the last project was basically focused on industrial applications. And trust plays a lot of role in it, mostly in supply chains. And this, in fact, it's true. We explored a lot of the trust issues in the supply chain actors that have to trust each other about provenance of products. For example, there's a huge use case on blue tuna fish from Japan to London, which is the most expensive fish. And you have to trust that the fish that is being brought from Japan to London is exactly the most expensive one that people in London think they're buying. So blockchain is being used to, in fact, to ensure trust. But I think trust with blockchain is quite specific to certain use cases and cannot be discussed in the way of a more decentralized, distributed trust, such as the more liquid fluids that President talks about. So I'm quite suspicious about these new models of decentralized trust, as I'm also becoming more and more suspicious about bringing decentralized technology models into governance, into social models, because in the past years, in this part of conversation that we're having also, I saw them fail a lot. I saw these transplantations from technology to social, and I was there because I was there in the beginning 10 years ago trying to bring this more decentralization, distributed architectures into the social. And I feel that if we keep trying to transplant concepts such as trust from the social to the technical and then bring it back to the technical, we are not in a really good place. But that's me, yeah?
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm wondering, because you are talking a lot about the future, and I'm having some struggle to think that policy is a field in which we don't have enough experimentation in the past. So I'm thinking about if you have any projects to study what kind of policies and difficulties Europe and humanity have faced, and how we have been how we act before, so we can understand better what things work, what don't, and try to, I don't know, research more in this way, not just in the futuristic eyeballing. Okay?
Yeah, no, That's a wonderful question also. In fact, we don't do that because when the policy lab was established always with a mandate on futures. But we have sister units that I haven't discussed here. So we are part of a bigger directorate inside the Joint Research Center, which is the competences director. That's why we now have competence centers. And we have another unit, which is more quantitative and what we call backcasting. So doing foresight on the other way, not foresight, but forecasting on the other way. And they're doing a lot of impact assessment, impact evaluation on EU policies. They're working a lot with indicators. They're doing a lot of historical reviews. They're doing a lot of models to trace, models based on historical data to figure out what went wrong or not with certain policies and then feed it back into the policy cycle. So we don't work on that, but another unit does, but they don't do experimentation. So it's, they are really one of those really scientific hardcore units doing like historical backcasting, number crunching, modeling, and yes, they do that, but in fact, I think we need more exploratory mode looking backwards. Yeah. In fact, this is one of the discussions that we had last year because we were figuring out how foresight could be a competence center, and we thought about why not add a stream on past initiatives, but we never did it, unfortunately.
Well, another question. Well, I have another question regarding artificial intelligence. And here I have been working on this topic during the last year and the implications for public administration and public service. And I would like to know what is your feeling and your guess on this, and how artificial intelligence is going to change the public services, the interaction between the citizens and public administration, and at the end of the day, the position of public employees in government and public administration. What is your vision, and how do you see this?
So in fact, one of the projects that I didn't present, it's on artificial intelligence that we have running, and I'm one of the co-leads on it. In fact, we just published a couple of months ago a report called Artificial Intelligence, an European Perspective, and you can find a lot of that there. But, and I worked more, and my team worked more on ethical and social implications of AI for public sector also. You know, again, I don't think, and this would apply to blockchain, AI, IoT, you know, any new technology that is being put into public sector right now. I don't think that technologies solve anything on their own, and I think the promises of AI are being way pumped up by a lot of companies that have services that are trying to sell them. Having said that, data and machine learning in public sector, it's a huge advantage. It has a lot of dangers, has a lot of perils for employment, for human resources, for human activities. But the moment you start seeing how much automated processes of data crunching, just that, I'm not even speaking about providing service, I'm just speaking about the backbone of the public sector, can speed up what we know about reality, how we deal with it, how we process it, with with all the biases, with all the dangers that our AI can bring onto it. I think this will be a big, big change, and I think it's going to happen really, really soon. And this is what we saw with our research. Our research was highly based on surveying EU landscapes on public and private sector, but also China and US landscapes. And here we are just playing with it. China, let's say in 5 years, they'll have a fully automated public sector. They're now using WeChat, the Chinese WhatsApp. Basically, they're placing public sector bots inside the private sector message mechanism to deal with public services. So they're basically automating their reply and their demand and supply of services through a private company, through an AI service, without a lot of human control. So if China is doing it, we don't even need to have a foresight exercise on that. The main question, and this is one of the things that in fact I appreciated working on this project, was that the European Union can be responsible for a lot of things and can be called a lot of names, but on AI has been really putting together, and with a lot of problems too, but still, a huge effort on ethical implications and ethical guidelines for AI development. And there's a high-level group on ethics that we are part of it, the GRC, the EU Policy Lab, and there are several expert groups on AI. Having said this, I think it will be quite a fight between lobbies, regulations, private companies, and the love for their own services that national governments will have to keep them human or to automatize them. I think we're in a quite awkward moment, because if you asked that 2 years ago, I think the answer would be more straightforward, because it would be, no, this will happen no matter what. But the huge backlash, against Facebooks and Cambridge Analytica and all that sometimes has nothing to do with AI, but brought that into the conversation, and we saw that at the policymaking level. So a lot of cautions are being put into the discussion at European level that were not there 2 years ago. And I think this will influence how public sector will, in fact, adopt. And it's a pity that Angela Hansen from OECD is not here, because they have also a really good outlook on AI. Yeah.
Sorry, just the last one. I'm wondering about the topic of climate emergency and environmental emergency, because I think it's top-notch theme. And I want to know what kind of ideas or what's your approach about how to get this solved?
In fact, with all the topics that we've had so far, we try to have a project on climate, and I like the way that you use climate emergency. We tried to have a project on climate emergency multiple times so far, but we never got it. So we've been doing internal research on it, preparing for whenever we can convince someone inside the community. It doesn't mean that a lot of part of the GRC are doing a lot of research. In fact, the GRC is divided into 8 directorates. There's a whole directorate just working on it. So I would say more than 400 people just working on climate. But for us, for the Policy Lab, that moment never came. So we've been working on sustainability, on transition models, circular economy. In fact, the serious exploration game was developed on circular economy scenarios, but we never worked on climate change. So anything I would say would be quite subjective on it. But I would love to have one project on it. We've been looking for it for a long time.
Ahora sí. So then actually now you were talking about also the challenges of maybe influencing. So I was wondering whether you had any kind of meta project. So kind of designing the process of policy making.
So in fact, if I would say that we in fact had a meta project, would be that. Because at the end of the day, the Policy Lab came from the idea that the policymakers or the policy-making process, the policy cycle, had to be different. And the mandate, before even any project started, the mandate that came with the Policy Lab, because there were already teams, so the Policy Lab grew on top of 2 teams that were already more or less in place, one in foresight, one in behavioral insights, more the foresight than the BI team. But and there were a lot of small projects, but before all the big projects came into place, this would be it. The main issue is that we never have, and this is one of the obstacles that in fact I think Policy Labs face, you never have time for those meta projects. Because you're always chasing around, the implementation, the real practical stuff. And some of us do research on the side, so again, we are all researchers, most of us at least are. And we publish, we do fundamental research on the topics. For example, I publish on public policy innovation. And some of us think about that on the side, but we never got to that moment where we wanted to do that. We do a lot of internal, let me just explain in 1 minute one thing. We have all these projects, and this is part of our core business, but we do a lot of small stuff on a day-to-day basis that I haven't showed here, that it's probably part of it, which is supporting new ways of developing policy or doing policy meetings or policy workshops, and bit by bit, it changes a little bit of what a policymaker is. So I would say, and this is not to brag or claim something, but there's more than 80%, like 2/3 of the policymakers that work with us, they change after they work with us. So in a way, more or less, yes.
Creo que cerramos, con esto ya te hemos exprimido suficiente y ahora seguimos. Vamos a tomarnos un descanso y agradecemos mucho a todas y a todos que han venido y a tu presentación que ha sido magnífica, muy completa. Gracias. You are exhausting.
No, come on. Hope it was useful.
We have a break.
No, trust me. Like, I can do this like days in a row.
I know.
Days in a row.
I feel guilty.
No, really. Like, I like this.
Okay.
No, like literally, I really like this. It's a problem. Tell me. I'm just disconnecting this.